My name is Bruce Ulrey, and I'm with the California Air Resources Board, and I'll be one of your trainers today, together with Carolyn Craig and Ronaldo Crooks, who's right here. So, obviously, you all are aware of ARB's training program. We have a pretty extensive air quality training program. We've had it in place for several decades, actually. We take training so that we can do our jobs better. From the regulated community side, you guys want to be able to comply with rules and regulations. You want to understand what the control technologies are. And you want to be able to stay in compliance. And so that's one of the goals of our program. We do our program also for air quality management professionals, air district staff, and other environmental management professionals. And the goal for us is we want to understand the regulations, understand the requirements, and then essentially our goal is to reduce emissions and protect public health. So that's why we're here, and that's why we have our training program. This is our website for our training program. We have about 30 different air quality classes. We teach about 180 classes a year. We have 6 different instructors. We just ranging everywhere from just basic air quality management to in-depth pollution control technologies, NSR, Title V, continuous emissions monitoring. So we have a pretty broad spectrum of different training. And so one of the trainings that I always try and tell people about is we have several online classes. And those are really valuable because you can kind of take them at your leisure. And anyway, the one class that I really recommend is called our Air Quality Training Program. It's about a 10-module training. And so if you haven't seen that one, I encourage you to take a look at it. We also now have our Fundamentals of Enforcement, which is a prerequisite for our visible emissions monitoring class. That's also online now too. So anyhow, I encourage you to take a look at those if you haven't already. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Bruce Ulrey, and I've been with the Air Resources Board since 1981. I've done a variety of different things. Currently, I've been in the training section for about the last 3 years. This is one of the classes that I teach with Carolyn and Ronaldo. And I teach a variety of other classes, New Source Review, Title V, plastic composites, oil and gas, health and safety. So I've had a variety of different courses that I've taught. And my background is in environmental chemistry and environmental policy and analysis. So anyhow, I'm happy to be here today as one of your instructors. And I'll introduce Carolyn Craig and let you introduce yourself.
I'm Carolyn Craig. I've been with ARB for 7 years now, and I've been working on the landfill rule for about 5 of those 7 years. Prior to that, I was with the El Dorado Air District, which is up just east of Sacramento, and we've been teaching this class for a couple of years now.
And I'm standing next to them so they're going to go into our mic here, so
Okay.
maybe they can hear you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ronaldo Crooks, and I majored in health science, BS in health science. Started off in San Joaquin County as an registered environmental health specialist. Stayed there for about 5 years and moved on to the Department of Toxics as a hazardous waste inspector, and then moved on to the Air Resources Board, where I got involved in the landfill program. So I'm currently the staff lead on the landfill methane regulation.
Great, thanks, Ronaldo. So anyway, we're very grateful to the San Diego Air District today for helping to bring you all to this training, because we think communication and understanding what the requirements are is really essential. Let me just begin by saying the reason we're here goes back decades, really, when scientists started determining that climate change was a really substantial issue. We started seeing things like melting glaciers, greater extremes in temperatures, changes in the ecosystem, rising sea levels. Over the last 150 years, the ocean has risen over 10 inches, and it's raising over 1/10 of an inch a year right now. So we're seeing things like, later or earlier snow melts, shorter precipitation years, greater heat extremes, greater impacts to air quality, more extreme ozone episodes. All these types of things we're now tying back to climate change. So back in 2006, the California legislature passed, and then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act. And essentially what that act required was for the Air Resources Board to develop a scoping plan which identified measures for essentially reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. So we're making pretty good progress, and I'll be talking about that in just a moment of where we're at in that effort. One of the measures that the SB 32 required was for ARB to develop what are referred to as discrete early action items. And one of those early action items was the landfill greenhouse gas regulation. That was passed by the Air Resources Board in 2010. And as part of that adoption of that regulation, the board directed ARB staff to work with the air districts to essentially help to implement that regulation. And so we have about 23 air districts now across the state that have entered into memorandums of agreement to help the Air Resources Board implement the regulation. The San Diego district is one of those air districts. And so we've been working very closely with the air district to essentially define what the requirements are for the record keeping, recording, leak detection, monitoring, repair, all the different elements of the landfill gas regulation. And so we are here today to also then share with you and help you all understand how to best comply with the regulation. So I like to show this slide here. This is basically the Muir Glacier up in Glacier Bay up in Alaska. This is the Muir Glacier over here on the right, and then over here this is the Riggs Glacier, 1941, and fast forward to 2004, and it just gives you an idea of the magnitude of the problem that we're talking about. I throw this slide in just kind of as an example. If all of the glaciers on Earth melted, the sea level would rise about 260 feet. So what we currently know as Los Angeles would then become the Bay of Los Angeles. So, this is probably a long way out, but it just gives you an idea, kind of an illustration of the way things could go. I don't know, I don't know if we'd be underwater here or not, but, definitely coastlines have the most to really fear from climate change. Adding on top of SB 32, and the scoping plan and some of the other measures in the scoping plan, just this last year, Governor Brown adopted an executive order, B 3015, to establish some interim additional emission reduction targets. So by 2030, now we have an interim target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, and by 2050, that target is to reduce emissions by 80% below 1990 levels. That executive order also directs state agencies that have any purview or authority over greenhouse gases to do everything in their power to help achieve those targets. And it also requires the ARB to revise our scoping plan to incorporate those interim measures. So, here's our 2020 goal, which is 431 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So that's the goal in 2020. You can see here we are in 2013. We're still quite a ways above that goal. We're at about 460. And so we still have a ways to go over these next 4 years. The landfill gas regulation will be one of the measures. We've got oil and gas. We've got our cap and trade program, our mandatory reporting regulation that I'm sure some of you are aware of. So the 2030 goal, which is 40% below 1990 levels, that would take us down to 259 million metric tons of CO2. And then that 2050 goal is 86 million metric tons of CO2. So you can see we've got a pretty big job in front of us, and we still have a long ways to go. One of the other efforts that is really in the news and is a definite effort that a lot of people are embarking upon is what's referred to as the Under 2 MOU. And it's an international MOU and with the goal of essentially limiting the increase in temperature change on the globe to less than 2 degrees Celsius. In December of last year, we had the Paris Climate Summit, and we had 195 countries at that time sign on to an international treaty that essentially is committed to that under 2 degree increase in temperature, as well as a recommitment to efforts that will be need to be made internationally to limit national GHG emissions. So once that agreement becomes effective, we need at least 55 countries representing 55% of the global emissions to sign on to that treaty, and then that will go into effect. Most likely it'll be around 2020 is the expectation. So methane is really what we're going to be talking about today. So methane is a global warming pollutant. It's actually a short-lived global warming pollutant. It makes up about 9% of the GHG emission inventory. That was in 2013. We see also that the majority of the emissions associated with greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, and that's associated with combustion of fossil fuels primarily. So this is going to be our overview for the day. We'll talk a little bit about just background of landfills, how they operate. I think some of this stuff we're going to share with you is probably a little bit oversimplified for you because this is what a lot of you do for your living. But this is a presentation that we shared with a number of the air districts and others. So we'll give you just a basic overview of landfills. Then Ronaldo is going to go into pretty substantial depth about the actual greenhouse gas regulation requirements. He'll talk about some of the just reporting requirements and who's subject to the regulation and what the reporting and record keeping requirements are and so on. Then we'll also, Carolyn will talk about the implementation guidance document, that white document, and just some of the important components of that document to help you all use that as a reference guide. And then we have what we refer to as an alternative compliance request exercise. And we'll break into small groups and we'll just kind of go over some of the considerations that the air district would take when if we have this provision, it's this alternative compliance provision that landfill operators can submit to the air district requesting slight revisions to their actual compliance with the regulation. So we'll have that exercise. Then we'll, we really don't need to talk about the MOU because that's really more.
It would probably be good just to let them know what the district's responsible to do.
So yeah. So we'll share with you what actually the provisions of our MOU with the districts are. Then I'll talk a little bit in the afternoon, just kind of reiterate some of what Ronaldo is going to talk about with regard to record keeping, reporting, leak detection, and repair. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit more about just how the air district will be helping ARB to implement the regulation. Welcome. So yeah, we got one chair over here. We got a couple chairs up front if you guys want. So with that, I think I'm going to hand the mic over to Carolyn.
Okay, we are going to go over some background on landfills and kind of a landfill primer. As Bruce said, many of you spend a lot of time on landfills, and this may be repetitive for some of you, but I think it's a really good overview of how things happen in the landfill. So, first of all, there's roughly 370 landfills here in California that have the potential to generate methane emissions. That 367 was developed in the early days of the regulation in the mid-2000s. Here we are, 2016, and it hasn't changed too much. We've got a few new ones coming online. We've got a few dropping off, so it's roughly 370. Methane is the second largest landfills. Methane in landfills is the second largest man-made source of methane in California. Does anybody have any idea what the first or what the primary source is? Livestock, yes, agriculture. So, and the landfills represent about 1 to 2% of the statewide greenhouse gas inventory. That's not just the methane inventory, but the entire inventory. So Bruce was showing in an earlier slide about 9% is methane. So landfills are roughly 20% of the portion of methane, which goes back to 1 to 2%. As you can see, here is ag manure, primarily cows, but includes all the livestock. And then here's the other end of the livestock, the belching or enteric fermentation. But here's landfills. Like I said, we're roughly 21%. You can also see industrial here. That's a lot of that's oil and gas industry, and then there's some other small sources. Okay, so how much is the total GHG emissions from landfills? In 1990, we were at 6.3 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and that was based on a global warming potential of 21 for methane. As you can see, in that decade between 1990 and 2000, it dropped. A couple things led to that, or caused that. One, a lot of the districts put in rules. I'm not sure the date of the San Diego rule, but they put in rules to control emissions from landfills. Secondly, there was a requirement to divert waste from the landfills. So that did a great job of reducing the emissions from that. But since then, you can see between 2000 and 2020, from population growth mainly, we have seen a sizable increase. So we're trying to reverse that and lower it. So how is methane formed in a landfill? Basically, you have the decomposable waste that goes in that's deposited, and it decomposes. So we're talking paper, we're talking food waste, we're talking any kind of thing that's a natural fiber that will decompose. You don't get a whole lot of decomposition out of plastics. Some of them eventually do. So it's based on how much waste is decomposable that goes in there. Normally it's roughly about 10%. It has changed over the years. It's actually gone down, but that's a big factor. The other big factor is moisture content and temperature of the waste. As moisture content goes up, it decomposes faster. As temperature goes up, it decomposes faster. So we see landfills out in the Mojave, east of here, and most of those generate for a much longer period of time, but we don't see the peaks that we see near the coast. So those are all what decomposition is, where you see different changes. It's basically reduced to methane and CO2, roughly 50-50 of each. So how do they landfill? It's basically a three-step process, excluding when you put it out by your curb. But the waste gets transported to the landfill. It is compact or spread out into very thin layers, and then it is compacted. Compaction in landfills is a relatively new thing. They used to do very little compaction. Since then, we've realized what a great resource our landfills are. It takes a lot to site one and to keep one going. So with the compaction, you can put more waste in the landfill. And then after that, we cover the waste with soil or other approved cover materials. Generally, the gas collection wells are installed later to collect the landfill gas. But in some cases I've seen, especially when you're putting waste on top of existing waste, they will actually put in the wells as they fill in. So it can be done both ways. Okay, so what is landfill gas composition? As I said, it's about half methane and half CO2. There's less than 1% trace gases. So, and generally the trace gases are known as non-methane organic compounds, or NMOCs. So you'll hear that acronym occasionally, but that's the trace ones. And again, the rate of production of gas depends on the type of waste you put in there, the age, moisture, and temperature. Okay, so the regulation was put together, and it's one of 9 discrete early action measures. Those were designed to get early GHG reductions. They were all done in the 2009-2010 timeframe. And again, the GHG was originally 21 when the regulation was done. They've actually now updated it to 25. So we're in the process of updating documents. And the regulation establishes standards for existing municipal solid waste landfills and new ones. And the effective date of this was June 17th of 2010. Okay, how does it differ from the federal rule? Many of you were familiar with the New Source Performance Standard, or NSPS, that was put out by EPA. The biggest thing that is different is our landfill methane rule here in California applies to smaller landfills. The threshold for the federal rule is 2.75 million tons of capacity, and there is also an NMOC threshold. Here in California, our threshold is 450,000 tons of waste in place, not capacity, but actually waste in place. And we have a heat input capacity threshold of 3 million BTUs per hour. So those are the biggest differences. We also have some more stringent requirements for landfill gas collection and control and component leak testing, the surface emissions monitoring, and compliance schedules. One of the big things is the federal rule has a instantaneous surface emission monitoring component. This rule also has an integrated. So not only are we looking for spot leaks, but we're also looking for the integrated, which tells us how your entire system is working in that area. So then we'll go into gas collection systems. Everything that applies to our regulation has to have an active collection system, which basically is the extraction wells. You've got the landfill gas moving equipment, which is your blowers, which basically put a vacuum on the landfill and direct everything towards the control equipment. At the end, we've got the control equipment is generally combustion for energy recovery or treatment. The other one, which you don't see too often, but you still may see them on small landfills, are the passive collection systems. And those basically just allow the landfill gas to go straight into the atmosphere. So one of the big things we did in our rule is minimize the number of passives by regulating the smaller landfills. So here's a diagram of an active system. This is similar to what we saw in the video. Here are your waste and your landfill wells going in there. With this slide, the most important thing we do is identify the blower here. Generally, landfills will have at least dual blowers so they can back each other up. But everything to this side of the blower should be under negative pressure. Everything this side of the blower, which is your control equipment, should be under positive pressure. That has impacts from leak detection. If you've got leaks, they're more likely to be on this side. You'll also see some over here, but if you keep in mind that this should all be under vacuum and this is under pressure, that's an important concept. So what do they look like? What does a collection system look like? When I got into landfills, I thought it would be, some very dramatic thing, but basically, here is a passive system, which is just a pipe sticking out of the ground. So an active system is the same pipe sticking out of the ground, which is attached to a well down below, but it has a hose on it. And those then go to other piping, which goes to the blower and the collection system. And what kind of devices does it go to? Flares is the most common one throughout the state, but you'll also see internal combustion engines, generally used to generate electricity. You'll see gas turbines and microturbines also used to generate electricity, or boilers used to generate steam. So you'll see, or heat. You'll see those. We're going to talk about flares today, since it's the most common one. All these other devices, ARB has excellent classes that pertain to each of those. So if you really want to get to know those kind of control devices in depth, those classes are great tools. So here is an open flare. These used to be used much more commonly under the landfill methane rule. They will all be phased out in 2018. They're less expensive, but on the downside, they have exposed flame. You can see the flame out here, and they're not easily source tested. Many jurisdictions have gone to enclosed flares just from a PR standpoint. People don't really like to see the flame coming out. But under the landfill methane rule, those are going to be phased out altogether. So here's an enclosed flare. You see these, even if there's an energy recovery system, they usually have a flare on site in case they have to divert to flare, or that's what was there before the energy recovery system came in. So within an enclosed flare, this is actually where the burners are. Generally, you'll see, it looks like your barbecue. If you have a gas barbecue, you'll see an X in the bottom, and then there'll be little places where the flame will come up and burn right at that level. So obviously you can't see the flame. Also for maintenance, this is located at ground level, which makes that easier. It's more efficient combustion, and for the source test, this is more easily source tested. You've got something that you can come up with a volume and come up with the source testing there. And right here in the foreground, you'll see a well.
How many folks here have this type of flare? Okay. How frequently do you guys source test them?
Once a year by AB 32.
Once a year?
Yeah.
So you guys how do you guys get your source testing equipment up there?
We do a man lift.
Do a man lift, yeah.
Yeah, here's the one right there. Okay. I'll also point out, here's what the blowers look like. You can see there's dual blowers there. Again, that's very common. If one goes down, then they still can continue to run with the other one. Okay. This is a carbon absorption system. This works for non-methane organic compounds, many of them. It does not work for methane. So if you've got, if you're in our regulation, this is not an acceptable alternative. So those are being phased out. But you will still see them in ones that are not yet subject to the rule, if they've got to clean these up. Does anybody know, does methane have a smell? No. No, there's no odor, so what you actually smell at the landfill gas is generally some of the trace organics.
Anybody have any of these carbon canister type controls still? Okay.
Okay. And the other options, we do have one landfill up in Northern California that is actually cleaning up their landfill gas and using it in their vehicles. So we've only seen that one in that one location. I'm not aware of anybody who's actually putting gas in the pipeline here in California. There may be some folks that are doing. And then they've got some landfill gas to electricity. And does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
So the enclosed flares are more efficient.
Yes, yes.
What makes them more efficient?
The fact that you've got a number of different, essentially burners. With the other ones, you kind of have one burner coming up, but you've got,
More efficient combustion. I see.
Yeah. yeah, I mean, you've got more places where you're burning off the emissions.
Or actually, is it that you have longer retention time to destroy the VOCs at a known temperature in an enclosed flare than you do in a candlestick?
Uh-huh. That would be another factor.
You have a more controlled flame. It's a hotter flame. It's just a better combustion process all around.
No, that would be also, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right, it certainly has a longer retention time in there. So, any other questions? Yes?
So closed landfills, when the methane generation decreases,
Uh-huh.
Are you guys getting away from carbon canisters as a solution for landfills that don't generate much methane?
Yes.
What's an alternative to that?
Okay, on the if they are closed landfills that are subject to our rule, they're over the 450,000 tons of waste in place and over 3 million BTUs, then they generally have to put in flares. They can.
But
the methane generation
is poor where you cannot operate in a closed flare. We have that one provision in the open flare section that if they can demonstrate that the gas quality is really poor, then they might be able to use that one clause. Possibly.
Yeah, but it would have to be under 3 million BTUs.
Are you talking about a landfill that doesn't have any controls at all?
No, the one, let's say that they do have control, but now
It's going
generation's
down.
going down.
Right.
Yeah,
We're kind of figuring out how to downsize it.
Yeah, what we have seen in practice is folks have actually put in smaller flares. So we have seen that. Another thing we do see is sporadic operation of the control device.
Intermittent
yeah.
operations.
So they have to turn it off. Our rule does require that we have continuous operation. So that's an alternative compliance option you have to look at. But again, you've got a chance that the methane is going to be escaping. But yeah, that's one of the things that I really find very interesting about landfills, and we'll do an HIC calculation later, is basically a landfill follows a bell-shaped curve. You start putting the waste in, you start getting methane generated fairly quickly actually, and then you get to the point where you stop putting it in and you're kind of at the peak of your methane generation, and then it goes back down. So the folks that are operating have to, they don't have a steady state system. They have to anticipate what's going to happen based on the waste that goes in and be able to collect it and accommodate it properly.
So if I can ask Jason a couple more questions about your landfill. Sounds interesting because we've had a couple of situations. Yeah. So now in your case, is this a landfill? It's closed? Is it over the 450,000 tons of waste?
We're not there. At our AB 32 sites, we're not at that point yet, but I guess at some point we will be.
So it's an active landfill or?
No, it's closed. It's
Closed.
a landfill, but we're over the 450.
Oh, but you're over the size threshold. And you're also over the HSE threshold of 3.0 million BTU per hour. So you're over that. So yeah, so see right now.
And he already has a control.
He has a control
So you're
device.
just kind of trying to figure out how do you
At
adjust.
what point, when the flare is too oversized for the gas generation, what's the alternative?
I think it's downsizing.
To scale it back is what you're saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So just get a new smaller flare, and then at some point when that flare has been too big, is there any point that you just free vent it because
No, you don't free vent it, but you can do intermittent operation. So, for example, in Mojave Desert, they have not any water, and so they don't even have enough water to get any decomposition going to make enough gas to operate a flare 24 hours a day. So what they do is they got an alternative compliance option where they have an intermittent. So they'll run it for 12 hours a day and then shut it down and then start it up the next morning. And so that's how they deal with that issue.
Right, that's one approach. And then the other thing is, maybe there might be the consideration of eventually closing the landfill. Well, it's already closed. Yours said it's closed.
Yeah,
I
no,
think we've kind of hit your options.
yeah, I mean, the other is the actual removal of the equipment, but you have to be down to,
To a
Right,
certain-
no, you gotta keep
To-
capturing it until it's no longer
Right, until
producing.
it's no more environmental issue.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And,
But we have other landfills that aren't under AB 32 that we have the same issue that we're downsizing the flare, but at some point,
mhm.
the methane's gonna be still, let's say, 10% methane.
And
You're
Right.
not able to
Right.
burn it,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, your HIC is gonna get so low, you're not gonna be able to run the flare.
Right.
Yeah,
And then,
And-
That never happened with the AB 32 side, I guess.
right. And then your other issue is the fact that if it's an NSPS site, then they would still want you to control those NMOCs. And a lot of the sites that have poor gas quality would use the carbon absorption system as a way of controlling that, right? So,
Right.
Yeah,
so
that wouldn't be allowed under.
it wouldn't be allowed under our regulation. So, yeah, it's an
I think we've
interesting.
pretty much given you the kind of the scenario.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But at some point, I think you have to look at that as the ancient landfills.
Absolutely, no, that's
Yeah.
gonna be, that's exactly correct.
yeah. And, yeah. And you're not the only landfills in the state that are dealing with that, so, yeah, we are looking at that. Any other questions?
Question in the back?
You answered, my question is along the same lines of arid locations.
Yeah, right.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, the regulation does allow that kind of flexibility. And we'll get more into what an alternative compliance option could be, but it's basically you have to document it and it has to be approved by the air district, and we'll go into that in more detail as we go forward.
Yeah, and we'll kind of show you how the rainfall level affects the model also for the HIC, for the heat input capacity later on. Okay, so now I've got questions for you guys. Why is it important to regulate methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills? And the choices are... What was that? D? Yes. Yeah, that's what hopefully your teachers taught you at school. If you see all of the above, usually it's the right one. But yeah, it's a potent GHG. I was going to say, is that going up and down? No, maybe it's just my eyes. It's a large portion of the state's methane emissions, and they're a large source of methane. Okay, when did the landfill greenhouse gas regulation become effective? B, right. Okay, existing federal and local air district landfill gas rules target primarily what compounds? So, this is sort of a trick question because now that we have the landfill methane rule,
The air districts are actually helping us.
are helping us with the methane, but their original target was the non-methane organic compounds, which are a component of VOC. So, okay, which of the following does not control methane emissions? Right, the carbon absorption systems. And that's because carbon is, why don't you give your quick explanation?
Yeah, that's just the chemical property is of methane. It's a polar compound. It's like water in terms of its polarity. It goes right through the carbon. NMOCs are nonpolar compounds. Carbon captures nonpolar compounds. So anyway, that's the quick explanation.
Okay. And which of the following cannot be adequately source tested? And that would be D. Okay, and now Ronaldo will go through the regulation.
So Ronaldo is our greenhouse gas regulation expert. So take it away, Ronaldo.
All right, well, I don't know if I like that term expert. Does anybody here in the class know the definition of expert? No one? Okay. X is an unknown quantity and spurt is a drip under pressure. So, so I don't like to use that term. Let's see, I'll put this right there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and talk about the landfill greenhouse gas regulation. The objectives is basically to ensure the reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, ensure that the collection and reduction of the fugitive methane emissions are being, requiring controls on uncontrolled landfills, ensuring that existing and newly installed gas collection and control systems are being maintained and operated optimally, and to ensure that there's no relaxation in conventional air pollutant controls. The regulation applies to all municipal solid waste landfills that received solid waste after January the 1st, 1977. Types of landfills that are exempt are hazardous waste landfills, landfills that received only non-decomposable type waste, so your C&D type landfill sites, and closed or inactive landfills that are less than 450,000 tons of waste in place. Okay, which landfills are exempt from the reg? Once again, it's closed or inactive municipal solid waste landfills with less than 450,000 tons of waste in place. We have two threshold determinations for installing controls. For active, uncontrolled municipal solid waste landfills that are less than 450,000 tons of waste in place, they must submit what's called an annual waste in place report. So we do that as a kind of like a trigger so that we can kind of see the increasing waste in place, and when it gets close to the 450, of course, that's when they would have to consider installing controls. At this point, as long as you're below the 450,000 tons of waste in place, no controls are required.
Hey, Ronald, the one where those first required, that was back when the regulation first went into effect and those reports started to be required.
Right. So December, I think, 2010. I think we have that on the
So
slide.
we have folks here that have an active landfill with less than 450 that are doing those waste in place reports. Yeah, you got one there. Okay. So yeah, you guys should all be aware that that is a requirement.
Okay. So if your landfill is active and over the 450,000 tons of waste in place, you would have to then calculate the heat input capacity within 90 days. And if that heat input capacity is greater than or equal to the 3.0 million BTU per hour threshold, then your choices are to either install a gas collection and control system or do what's called a demonstration test. That's where you demonstrate that the uncontrolled landfill generates an insufficient amount of landfill gas. So we'll talk about that demonstration test a little later on because it's kind of confusing. So the compliance schedules for installing controls at uncontrolled landfills. First thing you would have to do is submit a design plan within 1 year of determining the need to install the gas collection control system. Active landfills can install the control system within 18 months from the approval of the design plan. If it's an inactive or closed, you are allowed 30 months from the design plan approval. The design plan provides flexibility for the type of emission controls that are selected based on site-specific conditions at the landfill. Here in California, you have a variety of different temperature conditions. There's arid areas that don't generate a lot of gas. So, certain types of control devices may be a little better than others. There's a wellhead requirement in the regulation. Negative pressure has to be maintained at the wellheads, except under certain conditions. And we'll talk about that later also, such as like construction, where you're adding onto a well or doing maintenance of a well. We also have a component leak standard. The regulation calls for destruction removal efficiency for methane of about 99% for most control devices. The only one that doesn't fall under that are lean burn engines, and they must meet a methane outlet concentration of 3,000 ppm or less. The landfill methane regulation has surface methane emission standards. For instantaneous, it's the same as the federal NSPS. For landfills, it's 500 ppm. For instantaneous, it's used primarily to identify point source leaks on the landfill surface. What's different from the NSPS is our reg has what's called integrated surface monitoring. And the emission limit there is 25 ppm. And it's an average reading over a 50,000 square foot grid area. And if it's over that, then it would be considered a surface leak. Integrated surface monitoring is a good indicator of how well the gas collection system is operating overall. So like I said, the landfill, when they are doing surface emissions monitoring, they take the topo map of the landfill and they break it into 50,000 square foot grids. And you start off initially with a 25-foot walking space pattern, and that can be extended to 100 feet, based on your compliance with the surface emissions monitoring. Basically, after 4 consecutive quarters with no leaks, you can extend it from 25 to 100. It's an example of a landfill technician who's out doing her surface emissions monitoring. I believe she's wearing like a TVA 1000B on her back, and those are pretty heavy, aren't they, Bruce?
Yeah, we got any folks here? Do we have any landfill testing folks here? What kind of monitor do you guys use?
Now we use a TVA 2020.
TVA 20, so that's a newer model.
Yeah, it's lighter than that one.
Yeah, you have a backpack or?
Shoulder strap.
Yeah, a shoulder strap. I have a TVA 1000, and that shoulder strap gets a little heavy after a while. Does yours have a GPS on it?
It does.
Yeah, so that makes it nice. So yeah, they can be quite heavy.
Okay. So the regulation has a quarterly component leak testing requirement, monthly wellhead monitoring requirement, quarterly surface emissions monitoring for landfills for active and closed. However, if you're closed or an active landfill, that quarterly can be decreased to annual surface emissions monitoring based on 4 consecutive quarters of compliance, with the emission standards. The annual, the gas control devices have to be source tested annually. However, if the device is compliant after 3 consecutive source tests, then they can source test it every 3 years instead of annually. So the regulation has record keeping and reporting requirements. You have to record things like waste acceptance rates, surface methane monitoring data, component leak checks, gas flow rates, control device, destruction efficiency testing results. We have what's called an alternative compliance request. This allows flexibility due to site-specific nature of the landfills. Each landfill is different, and there's conditions out at your landfill where you're going to have hazardous areas, that the technicians shouldn't monitor because of steepness or it's slippery or whatever the reasons might be. So you can apply for an alternative compliance option, for situations like that. In those areas, once the documentation is submitted and approved by the implementing agency, then those type of areas could be excluded from surface emissions monitoring. So that's just one example why somebody might apply for an alternative compliance option request. So the landfill operator has to demonstrate the need for an alternative and demonstrate equivalent levels of methane control and enforceability. It's subject to the approval of the Air Pollution Control Officer, and there are no alternatives for the emission standards. Some of the compliance incentives in the landfill methane regulation is, like we talked about, the 25-foot spacing being increased to 100-foot spacing. Quarterly surface emissions measurements reduced to annual for inactive or closed landfills, and demonstration of past compliance with surface emissions monitoring standards. This part of the reg, what this last part applies to, in the very back of the regulation, there's a section where when the reg came out, there was hardly no landfills in California doing integrated surface emissions monitoring. But if they can demonstrate with the instantaneous monitoring that there were no exceedances, then closed landfills were allowed to go to the annual. So that's what that refers to. I mean, if you guys have questions about that, I could actually point you to that section of the reg. So the type of documents that you all will be submitting to the implementing agency would be like waste in place reports, landfill gas heat input capacity reports, You may or may not do this surface demonstration plan. If you have a new landfill coming in, you would have to do a gas collection control system design plan. If you're doing any kind of major modifications to your landfill, then you would have to submit a modified gas collection control system plan. Closure notifications, we don't see too many of. Equipment removal reports, we don't see too many of. You will definitely be submitting your annual reports, your surface emissions monitoring reports, and if you have any needs for alternative compliance options, then you would submit that. Okay, we're talking about the waste in place reports. When the regulation came out, all the landfills that were subject to the regulation were supposed to submit a waste in place report by December the 31st, 2010. If you were under that 450, you were required to continue submitting that waste in place report until you exceeded the landfill threshold. Those were due by March 15th until the landfill exceeded the 450 tons of waste in place or a closure notification was submitted. Basically, this pertains to the district and what they would be looking for when you submit the report. But you want to make sure it's complete, that the waste in place is in tons, because that's the way the reg is structured. Make sure any conversion calculations are correct, and make sure that it's certified by the responsible party. Then, were you going to?
Let's go ahead and,
Talk about heat input capacity and waste in place.
before Ronaldo does the heat input capacity, we're going to actually do one here online. And this Excel spreadsheet is available from our website, which is at the very last page of your presentation handouts. You can download this, but basically what it does is there's two inputs to this. Actually, there's three, but the K value, and what the K value is the amount of rainfall in the area. That tells you how fast your decomposition will occur. The other thing you've got is how much waste you're putting into the landfill every year. This right here is the decomposable component of the waste you put in. Right now, there are default values, which if you want to go over to methodology, you can see this is an EPA study here. This is for waste deposited up to 1964. Shows the different types of waste, and then here is the percent of decomposable component. At that time, 10.45% of the waste that was going in the landfills they estimated was decomposable. So as you go down, you can see that here's 65 to 74, 75 to 84, we'll go all the way down. The latest one that is in this, and this is for California, the latest one that is in here is 2007 to the present. This was a California Integrated Waste Management Board study. The Integrated Waste Management Board no longer exists. Now it's CalRecycle. So we expect to see some new studies coming out, but you can see now they're estimating 7.52% is decomposable. If you have specific ones, there's actually one more thing over here.
Oh, okay.
We go over one more. Yeah, you can click over on this guy here.
This one here.
You go over
Oh,
one
one
more.
more.
Well, actually, it's more than one more, sorry. This is a landfill specific that you can actually put things into. So, most folks use default, but this is one that you can also use. So let's go to the methodology
Okay.
and go down to the K value. So here are the K values. So it's looking at average rainfall over a period of time. It's not year by year. So Unfortunately, most of the ones in California, or fortunately, however you look at it, are less than 20. So that's a common one we see. Their K value is 0.02. If you're in this range, 20 to 40, we see that on some of the coasts, and especially in the northern part of the state. It bounces up to 0.038. This is, basically as this go up, it decomposes faster. So you'll see peaks sooner and then go down. And then we don't see too many folks over 40 here in California. So let's go back to the inputs. What you've got is inputs here, and you have emission output and gas heat output. So in our theoretical landfill here, why don't we make this 100,000?
Yeah, I like that.
Just for grins. And then let's go to the emissions output. Actually, you need to go back and to the input. It didn't quite accept that.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if we need to delete.
Do I
Yeah.
need to delete these?
Yeah, let's delete those for right now. Okay. Well, that still isn't happy.
I'm not liking all these other values. Darn.
Okay.
Maybe I should just start over.
Yeah, let's just wipe it out.
I think I wiped out the algorithm.
Aha.
How about if we go backwards more? I don't know if this will help or not. Say go back to 1960. Okay, this might work.
Okay, let's go for that. Okay, so 1960, and you can see here in 1960 started generating some emissions there in that year. It basically peaks in the next year and then keep going down until we see the end. You can see it looks like it lasts for quite a while. That actually might have to do with the algorithm. But this will keep going down. Let's go ahead and put in 61.
Okay.
And let's put another 100,000 in. And actually, let's go ahead and do,
Do a few.
yeah, let's do to where we get over 450,000. Okay. So you can kind of see, this is the start of a bell curve. Most landfills don't open for just 3 years. They're open for many years. But you can see how you start to increase and then come back down after the point when you quit putting waste in. This is emissions output. We've got methane as well as CO2. What we're looking for to put in a control equipment is the gas heat output. So why don't we go back up there.
So here we are in 1960, and then by 1960,
So you can see, yeah, here in 63, it gets you right over 3 million, which is, you know, the 450,000 tons of waste in place kind of equates to 3 million, which is our other threshold. So this one would be right on the verge of doing, but you can see as we go over 450, how you would continue to generate more and more gas. So, but, you know, if you're interested in it, feel free to find it on the landfill page. Just to let you know, this is currently calculated for 21 greenhouse gas value. We will be changing it to 25. It's very clear on the website that it's for 21.
the global warming potential.
Yeah, global warming potential. And when it goes up to 25, this curve will come out a little further. So.
Any questions? Yeah.
Is it possible to have a landfill with 450,000 tons of waste in place and it have a lower than 3 million metric tons of BTU?
Sure, sure.
So part of the requirement was like 90 days from 450,000 tons in place. Where do you go from there then? if you're lower than the threshold?
Then you basically just have to do a heat input capacity report every year. So the first report is the waste in place. When you hit 450,000, then you start doing the HIC.
As long as you demonstrate you're below that 3, then all you have to do is keep reporting at that point. Then if you exceed that 3, then Ronaldo's going to get into what your options are then.
Right, right. And that, the waste in place is for the active ones. So, on this particular one, let's go back to the inputs. I mean, you can see it's based on, 100,000 tons each year on this particular NDOC. As you saw more recently, the disposable component, or decomposable component is much lower. So yeah, you could certainly go over. And, if we spread this out a little more, we probably would not have peaked at 3. But once you get to 450, it's kind of a, you need to start watching this because you may exceed 3 in the near future.
Let's see if we cut it back to here. Let's just say we went back to like 50 for a couple years in a row.
I was going to say, you probably want to drop that 350 because that's what bumped you up there.
Well, I wanted to see how the heat input capacity. So then, then it kind of keeps going up. As you keep putting just a small amount in, it keeps that heat capacity over the threshold, at least for a few years.
Yeah, let's go back to there and maybe drop this 350 to 250. And the numbers that you put in here is what you report to Cal Recycle.
So now, you see you never quite reached that 3.
Yeah. Of course, I think that were we under? No, we were right at 450 and you're not quite to 3 yet.
But yeah, now we went, total input is over 450.
Yeah. Actually, let's go up and change the K value. Well, let's do it for a, go to 0.038, which is the 20 to 40 inch. And you can see it hit, 3 way back here, and you're up over 5. But now this curve is dropping off sharper, so you got more of your emissions quickly.
Yeah, it's decomposing quicker and doing its thing sooner.
Is the deadline based on the year you're anticipated to exceed 3 million, or is it based on having a report based on a year's?
You redo it every year,
Right.
so you see every year, I put this much in, and so this is where I am now.
Right, so I'm saying, say my report says I'm going to go over 3 million, but it's going to be 10 years from now. Do I need to install controls now, even though
No.
it'll be 10 years until
Yeah,
I need them? So it's when you actually
when you
exceed.
actually exceed it,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Yeah. And then there's some other control options as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, any
more
other questions on this one?
I was wondering, is the calculator available online?
It is.
Yeah, I wonder if I could guide us there. I think I'm connected to the internet right now.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not, but I will.
Yeah, you can get there directly from the link on the last page of the presentation, if that's
Oh, yeah,
helpful.
there's that link.
You could do ARB landfill methane rule, and that might get you there.
Yeah, I was just trying to go to our ARB website. It's this.
Yeah, you want the
There
outside
we go.
one
No, I'm on the
though.
outside.
Okay.
Nope, I went too far. Hold on.
Yeah.
So, let's see.
Go to climate change,
Yeah.
Just go to climate, you see climate change on? Okay, there we'll go.
and then go to waste sectors if you see it somewhere.
Yeah, go to W. Oh,
Oh, I was just gonna go to climate change.
than waste sectors.
So waste
Yeah.
sector.
Or you can do it from economic sectors. And if you go down to waste, right here, and go just a little farther.
To landfill methane.
whoa. Control measure
There
right
we go.
there. Yeah.
So that probably wasn't the most simple for people to see, but basically,
Go ahead
yeah.
and click on that one, and
All right.
it'll actually take you to the.
And then
This
scroll,
one, yeah.
scroll down and you'll see the link right there, landfill
Right
emissions
here.
tool.
So here's the tool. This is it right here.
Yes.
So yeah, you might have to kind of hunt and peck to find it, but yeah, it's on ARB's page. It's under the climate change program. You can poke around in there and you'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, the link is on the last page of your presentation. So, or the link to the landfill page. So.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank
now
you.
that you guys have done an HIC report, go for it.
Thanks, Carolyn.
All right, thanks, Carolyn. So Carolyn basically told you pretty much everything there is to know about the landfill gas heat input capacity report. So I won't repeat a lot of that. So if you're over this HIC of 3.0 million BTU per hour, you have to do your HIC annually until it exceeds that, or a closure notification is submitted if the landfill is active. And then she told you about the K value and dock percent, cover material used. Some of you are familiar using the land gem, which is required under the NSPS emission guidelines for municipal solid waste landfills. We don't have a problem with you using that. The regulation requires you to use the IPCC emissions tool, but you can run both models and you can choose the most conservative results out of the two. So the gas collection control system design plans for a new system had to be submitted by June 17, 2011 if it was an uncontrolled landfill, 1 year after the heat input capacity was greater than or equal to 3.0 million BTU per hour, or 1 year of measuring a surface methane leak of 200 ppm or greater using instantaneous surface monitoring procedures. This one here is that surface demonstration test that I was talking about. So basically, if it was an uncontrolled landfill, that's the only time that you would use this surface demonstration test. And what you would do is you would use the instantaneous method, and if after 4 consecutive monitoring periods you don't exceed that 200, you don't equal it or exceed it, then you're allowed to do it the next year, until such time you exceed the 200, and then at that point you would have to go ahead and submit your design plan if you're an uncontrolled landfill.
And then that measurement would be a 50,000 foot grid test. And so,
Right.
yeah, essentially, so if you have greater than the 3 million metric BTUs per hour, but you're still less than 200 part per million, that gets you out of the control requirement.
Right.
As long as you continue to demonstrate that you don't have any exceedances above that 200.
So that's the only time you'd use this surface demonstration test is if it's an uncontrolled landfill. So this is what the district would be checking for to make sure that it's prepared by a professional engineer and it meets the requirement of section 95464 for the design plan. Okay, we'll go ahead at this point and talk about design plan modifications to an existing system. If you have any kind of modification to an existing design plan, it has to be submitted within 90 days of any event that requires a change to the design plan. And Carolyn, do you know what page where it talked about what constitutes, an example of what constitutes design plan modification?
Examples of modifications.
Yeah, we looked it up yesterday. Okay, while you're looking it up, I'll continue to go. We have Carolyn looking up what would be some examples of what would constitute modification of the design plan. We had a question about that yesterday. It typically involves more of the major changes at the landfill. Maybe you're upgrading a blower, or upgrading a flare, something that would drastically change, what you originally submitted under your original design plan, would constitute a modification. It would not be just adding a simple well or well maintenance or any small event like that.
It is 2-8.
2-8. So if you look in your implementation guidance document on page 2-8, at the very top,
That's number 7.
number 7, examples of modifications to a gas collection control system that would require a design plan to be amended or updated include but are not limited to the following changes made from what was contained in the original approved design plan by the implementing agency, such as changes in the density of the wells, number of wells per acre, installation of a blower or replacement of a control device, such as a flare, due to insufficient size capacity. Regular maintenance or well replacement would not require an amended design plan. Alrighty.
So if you were adding a new well, then you would have to do a modification to your plan.
I would say that wouldn't constitute a modification. However,
You're changing the number of wells.
you could probably do what's called an addendum to the design plan.
Okay. So it's different than a modification?
Right, and that's discussed earlier in the regulation. Okay, it's found on, section 95464, and it will be little a, and then number 4.
So it's B4 of your guidance document. A4, so it'd be B5, right?
B5.
Okay.
So if an owner or operator is modifying an existing gas collection control system to meet the requirements of sub-article, the existing design plan must be amended to include any necessary updates or addenda. It must be certified by a professional engineer.
So that wouldn't be done through the modification process?
I'm thinking just general maintenance or expansion of a well. They typically, how often do you guys expand your wells? Is that something that's done on a regular basis or annual basis? And is it 1 or 2 wells, or do you typically do 10 or more wells?
It could vary.
It could vary? Okay.
And you could have a scenario where you're having a problem, your collection system isn't working, so you just have to add a new well. So, anyway.
Okay. All right. For one of the district contacts here, do you typically, under your Rule 59, do you require them to notify you when they install additional wells? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, they have to notify us whenever they're digging into the waste, basically.
Whenever digging into the waste. Okay. All right.
Probably do well.
Okay. So it sounds like to me that if they're adding these additional wells, then yeah, they'd submit an addenda to the design plan.
You probably want to update your maps and all that, so it shows.
Right.
So typically what we do is prepare an update letter.
Okay.
And we say attached are the overall site plans and
The additional wells that have been installed.
wells.
Okay.
And all that is usually tentative because you don't know how things will change on site. By the time you go to the site, a bench may or may not be there. So we just say that this is the overall site plan.
Right.
And we provide a letter and we say, please issue a mitigation measures letter. And the
Okay.
air district typically responds with a letter.
Okay.
Okay. So that would work. That would work. Okay, and so I guess what the district would look for under our regulation anyway, is that it's prepared and certified by a professional engineer, and it meets the requirements of section 95464, A4 and A5. Okay. Closure notification reports, you probably won't be submitting a lot of those, but if you did, it should be submitted within 30 days when the landfill is no longer accepting refuse and the landfill is considered closed. Equipment removal reports, we don't see too many of these, but if you were removing the control device, and shutting down the wells, and you'd submit within 30 days prior to cessation of the control system operations. You will be submitting annual reports, and those are due by March 15th of each year. They contain the key record-keeping and reporting requirements such as emissions-related data, gas collection control system monitoring, performance test data, and landfill design information. And you will be submitting your surface emissions monitoring reports, and that would contain the grid map, date the surface emissions monitoring is being conducted, equipment calibration information, what the weather conditions are when your technician is doing the surface emissions monitoring, and what those instantaneous and integrated surface methane concentration measurements are. So the district staff would be checking for the walking pattern that's being used, whether it's 25 or 100 feet, what weather conditions were when the testing was being conducted, what areas you excluded from your surface emissions monitoring. So you want to be sure to, identify on your topo map which areas are excluded, and if that hasn't gotten prior approval from the district, be sure to submit a letter. We call it an alternative compliance request in our reg to the district, and they would look over your supporting documentation and either approve it or disapprove it. So the surface emissions monitoring reports would contain any exceedances of the surface methane emission limits, their locations, and remonitoring results and whatever corrective actions were taken. Surface demonstration plan. So this is what I was telling you about earlier about uncontrolled landfills. So if they exceeded that HIC threshold of 3.0 million BTU per hour, they can try to demonstrate that their landfill is generating insignificant amounts of methane. They could either install the control device or try to show, hey, our landfill's not generating a lot of methane, and you would demonstrate that by doing your 4 consecutive quarters of monitoring and showing that there's no surface methane leaks equal to or greater than 200 ppm using the instantaneous surface monitoring procedures. So once that limit is exceeded, though, then you have no other options but to install a gas collection control system. And what the district would do is they would probably send out an inspector on an annual basis just to kind of verify that there are no surface leaks above that 200 ppm. Does anybody have any questions about that, or is that pretty clear? Good.
If your HIC exceeds 3 million BTU, you're required to install a gas collection or demonstrate the 4 consecutive quarters. So does that mean you have the year to demonstrate that? What if you had an instantaneous
reading of a greater than 200?
quarter?
Then you're out of luck, because that's the way it's written basically. It's a very strict requirement. What brought this about is there are some really arid areas in the state, so they were saying that, hey, we're right on that borderline, and our landfill really isn't generating enough gas to support a flare. That's the minimum control device, right? So we said, okay, you could do this surface demonstration test using the most stringent surface limit, and the reason the 200 ppm was chosen is when the reg was being developed, we were initially considering 200 ppm as the instantaneous surface methane limit. However, we had to back off because Cal Recycle said that going down to a surface limit that low may cause intrusion of air into the landfill and possibly resulting in fires. So we backed off of it, but we kept it strictly for the surface demonstration test. So we figure if you aren't exceeding 200 ppm, then it shouldn't be a problem. But if you exceed it, then you have to go ahead and install that gas collection control system.
And so let's say you do, you're into the third quarter and you get a 200 part per million. And so it's like, okay, now I'm gonna have to install a control device. You have a year from that point in time to do your design plan, right? And then the district has 120 days to approve your design plan, and then that has to be installed then, bless you. It has to be installed within 18 months. That's kind of the time sequence of how it would play out.
So some of the contractors were getting confused with this requirement. Well, it's not a requirement, this option in the regulation, because there were some landfills that already had control devices installed, and they were thinking that instead of having to do the instantaneous and integrated surface monitoring, that they could use this surface demonstration test as a way of saying, hey, look, our landfill is generating, insignificant amounts of methane. So they would use this as a way of trying to prove that. So, but it's not written that way. It's strictly for uncontrolled landfills, so not landfills that already installed their controls. So hopefully that clears that up. So the surface demonstration plans, the district will be checking, to see that you started it, pretty much close to exceeding that threshold of 3.0 million BTU per hour. They'll look for completeness, your surface emissions test for the instantaneous, making sure that you've done it for the 4 consecutive quarters, and then ensuring that there's no exceedance of the 200 ppm instantaneous limit. Okay, the alternative compliance request, we see a lot of these, and it's because each landfill has unique characteristics. So when you're writing a regulation, you don't know of all the different situations and scenarios that might be out there at a landfill. So this kind of provided some sort of flexibility for landfill owner operators so that if there's things we didn't think of, that are happening out there for you guys, then this might be a way that it can be addressed. So here's some of the following examples are some alternatives that might warrant consideration, such as semi-continuous operation of the gas collection control system. So this is similar to what Jason was talking about, where you have a landfill with declining methane quality, and it's not generating enough methane, or the quality is not good enough to operate that flare on a continuous basis, which is what our regulation requires. So one request might be to operate the control device on a semi-continuous operational basis. So you shut it down and you wait for the gas to build up, and you click it back on. So that's one situation, or additional time allowance for maintenance or repairs. You'd have to document the need for the additional time, of course. Alternative wind speeds at landfills that are inland versus coastal. You might have steady wind blowing through here, like some of the Santa Ana winds can whip through certain areas, and it creates a problem for you guys having to do the surface emissions monitoring. So that might be a situation where you would request an alternative. Under the federal requirements, they allow you to do the surface emissions monitoring under whatever the prevailing wind conditions are. So we don't have that in our regulation. Another alternative might be for walking patterns to address safety issues. Steep cliffs, steep areas, slopes on the landfill surface that might be hazardous for the technicians to walk. So the criteria that the district staff might use is look at your compliance history, verify that there is sufficient documentation demonstrating the need for the alternative compliance option. They may review your permit, your monitoring results, topo maps, photographs, met data, and other supporting documentation, and your maintenance and inspection records. Okay, at this point, we'll ask you some questions to test your knowledge. So what landfills are subject to the landfill greenhouse gas regulation? B and C? All right, that's correct. Under what conditions can the 200 ppm surface methane emissions demonstration test be used? What'd you say? D? Okay. It's A, uncontrolled landfill with heat input capacity greater than or equal to 3.0 million BTU. Does anybody have any questions on that, or is it pretty clear? Okay. Okay, what does the alternative compliance request provision provide? It's a trick question. We took 15 minutes to come up with this one. B? Okay. Yep, that's correct. Okay, integrated surface methane emissions monitoring is required for which types of landfills? Okay, everybody says A. Very good. Okay, at this time we'll turn it back over to Carolyn. Implementation guidance document. There you go.
All right. Your implementation guidance document is the white one here that we've been looking at all morning, off and on. So I was going to quickly go over what is in that. You've already seen some of the items that it's good for. And you can see mine has been well used. I just described it as my right arm. I don't know if my memory's going, but I always keep this nearby to double check. I've probably read this reg 500 times, but I always still have to go double check it. So what is the purpose for this guidance document? There was a lot of purposes for this. It was to assist the local air district in implementing and enforcing the regulation. It was to assist the landfill owner-operators to comply with the requirements. You know, as soon as you write a regulation, you get lots of questions that didn't come up during the regulation writing. So this was to clarify some. But there was also a lot of concerns raised by stakeholders during the regulatory process. So it addresses a lot of those questions. It was initially completed in July of 2011 and updated in February 14th. The difference between 2011 and 2014 was addresses on some letters in there. Originally all the letters were directed towards the Air Resources Board. Now that the air districts are implementing and enforcing this regulation, all the addresses were changed to the enforcing jurisdiction, or the implementing jurisdiction. So not significant. You are going to see another one come out in the near future because of the changes that were recently made to the NSPS. So we will be updating that shortly. This is available on the website. We went ahead and printed them out for everybody here, so you don't have to tie up your printer for a few minutes and get all your coworkers angry, because there is a few pages here, but it is available for download and printing. So what is in it? There are 3 chapters and 6 appendices. Everybody's got their favorite chapters and appendices. I'll go through them real quickly. First one is an intro. The second one is the regulatory requirements, which I find really useful. In there's a comparison between the old NSPS and this rule, which is really helpful. And Chapter 3 has a lot of information on implementation and compliance. That's where there's some helpful charts in there. There's a number of appendices that are very helpful too. There's an index, so that's one of my favorites because I can just look up the topic that I'm looking for and go straight to it. Appendix B is a copy of the actual regulation. If you go to your Appendix B, we've already been there several times before. I keep this close at hand, so that's one of the things I use this for the most. There's a flow chart in there, also some sample surface monitoring procedure came out of South Coast. It might be helpful for you. There's some example report forms, and lastly, the landfill gas tool, the HIC tool. There is a paper copy of that in the Appendix F. Some of the other items that are helpful is on, well, let's go to table, actually, Chapter 1, page 3. A lot of you guys are familiar with the NSPS, the existing NSPS. Again, this is going to be updated. But this goes through what the differences are between this rule and the NSPS. It's a nice, concise place. There's 3 pages that go through it. Another one that that enforcement staff seem to like is on page 2-19, which is a summary of all the record-keeping requirements. This is in one place, so you don't have to go through the whole rule. It tells you what all the record-keeping requirements are. So anyway, when you get a chance, or if you have any questions, this is a great tool. If there's anything we missed in 2011 that we need to address, please let us know. We will be doing an update in the near future. So.
Okay, so Ronaldo's now going to talk about the landfill MOU that we have with the Air District. And we're going to make, who didn't get a copy of the answers? We got one, just one? Oh, okay. All right, we'll make.
There's two. Two people.
Oh, wait a minute, actually, there's no one there.
There you go.
And then the gentleman in the striped shirt at the very back.
Thank you. Okay, so go ahead, Ronaldo.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and talk about the landfill Memorandum of Understanding. So the districts that signed the MOU with the state to implement and enforce the requirements of the landfill methane regulation would basically, they're the ones that would go out and implement and enforce regulation. And it's an agreement between ARB and the districts. There's about 23 districts that actually signed the MOU with the Air Resources Board. It provides for coordination between ARB and the air districts to reduce methane emissions for municipal solid waste landfills. The key information that the district would be required to submit under the MOU is a summary of NOVs and any other citations that were issued, the total number of instantaneous surface emissions methane readings greater than 200 ppm, a summary of alternative compliance requests, and also any emissions inventory related data, which is found in section 95470 B3A through I. So while this is on the screen, I just wanted to point out that the districts will most likely ask you to copy us on the annual reports, because this information is included in the annual report, and the emissions inventory related data is also included in the annual reports that you all would be submitting to the district. Then what we do with that information is we record it in our landfill database and keep track of what's pretty much going on statewide with the landfills.
Okay, Ronaldo?
Yes.
So for the facilities that are submitting their reports to the district, they can also CC ARB on those reports, right?
That is correct, yep.
So,
Ronaldo.
yes.
No, Ronaldo's email is.
You, Ronaldo specifically, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. Okay, so as far as the NOVs and summary of alternative compliance option requests, that information that the district would basically send to us. So the annual summary is submitted by May 31st of each year. So at this point, we'll go ahead and test your knowledge. When does ARB need the annual summaries from the districts? Is it annually May 31st, or it doesn't matter? Or A and B?
D.
D? That's correct. How does ARB want the districts to submit the annual summary? Does anybody have an answer for that one?
D.
D? Very good.
D, but I vote for A.
Vote for A.
It's easier for all of us if the landfills just submit a CC to ARB, then the district doesn't have to go and dig through those.
Okay. All right, very good. Does anybody have any questions about the MOU that the district signed with the Air Resources Board to implement and enforce the regulation? Okay, all right. Okay. Bruce, would you like to...
Yes, okay, I will, here's some more copies of the answers, so for our exam, or exercise. Okay, so what I'm going to share with you is kind of going to be a little bit of a reiteration of what Ronaldo talked about. I'm going to talk about some of the record keeping and reporting. Then I'll go over some of the actual going out in the field and doing some of the monitoring and leak detection and so on. So we'll kind of go over some of the methodologies associated with where the leak testing has to occur, you know, down at the gas collection part of the system as well as the control side of the equation. So one of the places I want to point you to in your implementation guidance document, a couple of places. The first one Carolyn mentioned earlier. It's that, let's see, 2-19. There's a good table in there. Starts off in 2-19 and it goes through 2-21. And essentially it goes over the different types of information that are required. So we have information on the gas collection and control system, design, so including the waste input as well as the waste capacity. So acceptance rate and current waste in place. Also information on gas collection and control system downtime, expected gas flow rates to the gas control device, performance tests and emissions related data, and so on. So that's on pages 219 through 21, so I'm not going to go through every one of those requirements. The beauty of it is it does then have references back to the regulation, so that'll help you to understand if you have any questions about that. One note about records, they do have to be maintained. They may be maintained off-site, but they do have to be maintained in California, and they do have to be retained for at least 5 years. So some of the information that has to be reported are downtimes that are greater than 5 days. Again, the gas flow rates, projected flow rates, wellhead monitoring, and so the operator has to do that monitoring at the wellhead monthly, and then any positive readings at the wellhead do have to be recorded. Any positive pressure, and then also the corrective action that was taken has to occur within 5 days. And then if that doesn't solve the problem, then they have an additional 15 days to address that, and that also has to be recorded. The system design, system specifications for the control system, so that has to be maintained with, if there's any manufacturer's information, that has to be maintained for the life of the equipment. The system operating parameters, things like temperatures and flow rates and emissions monitoring. If you go to Appendix D in the guidance document, it actually will then also talk about some of the procedures for the surface emissions monitoring as well. So, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So again, though, back at the control system, so system operating parameters, downtimes that are greater than 1 hour, any source tests that are conducted, and then also quarterly monitoring, and then again actions that are taken to repair leaks that occur within 10 days. So for the surface emissions monitoring, that's where we get to the Appendix D. And so that will actually specify the methodology. And again, I'll come back to that. But from the reporting standpoint, the surface emissions monitoring has to happen quarterly. You can go to an annual monitoring if you can demonstrate 4 sequential quarters of compliance.
And then if an air district inspector finds a leak that's greater than the emission standards, then you revert back to that quarterly monitoring. So some of the information that's recorded for the emissions monitoring, which one of the emission limits is exceeded. So if it's the integrated standard or if it's the instantaneous 500 part per million standard, what the concentration that was recorded, when, where, and then information that's reported on a topographical map. And then again, any remedial actions that are taken, including the type of action that was taken and then any remonitoring that was conducted. And then other records that need to be included are construction activity records, and that's covered in, if you want to know what the definition of a construction activity, that's in the definition section under 95466. And then records of emission mitigation measures, again, annual waste in place, acceptance rate, and then records on the non-degradable waste that's deposited in the gas collection that's not connected to the gas collection system. So any questions on record keeping? Okay, so I'm kind of guessing that most of you are probably familiar with some of these reporting requirements. Everybody here done reports, or who's done reports? Yeah, so maybe half the room. So when we actually then do the field monitoring, that's where we really get to Appendix D, and that's where it really specifies the methodology. But the two types of monitoring, you have the actual collection system and then you have the surface monitoring. And for the surface monitoring, we're talking about the integrated monitoring as well as the instantaneous monitoring. The instantaneous emission limit is 500 parts per million, and then the integrated standard is 25 parts per million, and that's averaged over a 50,000 square foot grid, which, as Ronaldo mentioned earlier, you can have different spacing, but it starts off at 25 foot grids, and then you can have a 200 foot wide grid by a 250 foot grid, or however you get to 50,000 square feet. So if you do get an instantaneous measurement, it does have to be repeatable. And so basically what you want to do is you want to come back afterwards and make sure that it's still leaking, and then you have to fix it. So if the air district finds a reading, then it's a violation. If you find a reading, then you just have to fix it and keep records on that. So the methodology that ARB uses, the regulation is silent on what actual type of instrumentation you have to use, but it has to meet method 21, calibrated to methane. And so we use what's called a TVA 1000. I know, Brian, you were saying you use the TVA 2020. Ours is a flame ionization detector, so it's capable of measuring methane down to atmospheric air levels, so down below 1 part per million. So anyhow, yeah, again, the technology is really, as far as the detector, is not prescribed. Anybody ever try to use oh, bless you. Anybody ever try to use a photoionization detector to do methane? So there's some debate about whether you can do that or not, but I think it really comes back to, can you actually calibrate it against the standards that we're talking about? So some of the other requirements, again, this goes back, if you go to Appendix D and you go to, I think it's D3, it'll give you some of the considerations for how you do your selecting your grids, how you do your routes. So for example, a walking pattern of 25 foot spacing, interval at a 50,000 square foot grid, a route of approximately 2,450 linear feet to be walked in 20 minutes. So part of it is just the rate at which you walk it. And so Brian, how long does it typically take you to do a route for a grid?
Well, we do simultaneous. So
Right.
Stay in there for 25 minutes.
So you stay right around 20, 25 minutes. Yeah, so that's pretty typical. That's pretty much what the method talks about. Again, other types of considerations is you can't have any rain within the last 72 hours, and the wind speed has to be less than 5 miles per hour or less than 10 miles per hour for 15-minute average gusts, or 5 miles per hour for 15-minute average, or 10 miles per hour for an instantaneous gust. So those are just some of the basics. As far as when you're doing your sampling, you've got your wand for your instrument. It's typically, I don't know if you guys recall seeing the photo that Ronaldo showed earlier, but you'll have a wand that you'll carry a backpack on your back, and then you'll have your wand. You keep it about 3 inches from the ground. So that's and you just kind of walk at a speed that kind of gets you. You're kind of going like this, I guess would be about the right speed. Is that about how you do it? Something like that. So that's the kind of the basics of doing the monitoring. And then you need to record the wind speed during your inspection using some type of a wind monitoring anemometer. So the instantaneous surface emissions monitoring, again, that's kind of an indication of the general condition of the surface of the landfill. So if there's cracks or erosion or areas where the cover is thin, that's where you're going to pick up some of those higher readings, and so that's what that measuring does. Again, it can be done simultaneously with the integrated monitoring. And so a key of all of this monitoring is you have to have a methodology that you're using, and basically, you want to be able to describe how you did it, and you want to just use that same methodology and don't deviate from the methodology, otherwise you enter variability into your measurements. So some of the different types of locations for the instantaneous monitoring areas that have prior exceedances. So you're going to want to, if you got trouble spots, you're probably going to want to focus on those more so, and you're going to know where those are. If you have any indications of odor at the landfill, like landfill gas odor. And then also if you see distressed vegetation or that type of indication where there might be leaks. And then again, penetration, cracks, erosion, and so on. So the integrated monitoring, surface monitoring, is really a little bit more of an indicator of the effectiveness of the gas collection system. And so it's really going to give you a more of an overall picture of how the system is working. And again, here's an example of a grid size. Again, it could be 200 by 250 feet. It could be 100 by 500 feet or what have you. And so for inspectors, they can make up their own grid. So just be aware, they don't have to look at your map and just say, okay, we have to follow your map. They can do however, if they see an area, you said, well, that was exempted because I don't have to monitor that. Well, they can still go up there and monitor that, just so you're aware. So they can create their own grid. They can follow your grid. And again, they're going to look at your records. They're going to ask you, well, where are some examples of problem areas? And they'll work with you. I mean, the whole goal here is we're just trying to encourage compliance. So, if you have problem areas in the past, they might ask you about those. So these are just things I think I've already covered. Any questions so far? Again, as Ronaldo mentioned, there are compliance incentives. So if a operator can demonstrate with 4 consecutive quarters that they don't have any exceedances of the surface monitoring standards, then they can revert to that annual testing. However, if we do find a violation, then they have to go back to that. This is for the spacing, actually, the walking pattern. So you can go from 100 feet, or go from 25 feet to 100 feet pattern. So that's one of the incentives for a good operation. And then the other one is actually for the quarterly versus annual testing, if you don't have any violations. So on the gas control side of the equation, we're looking for things on the pressure side. So we're going to be looking at possible leak points, at joints and valves, and any piping that may have had any problems with it. So some of the indicators that we might look at are odors. We'll look at just deterioration. Heat and sunlight and things like that can actually degrade some of the PVC piping. And then we'll also, we'll look at your records and we'll talk to you all and, have you help us with the inspection. Let us know if you've had past problems. We can go look at it and go, yep, you're good. So that's kind of a quick overview of the monitoring side of it. And so are there any more questions about that? Okay, so just kind of a quick recap.
D.
So D. And then inspector may inspect. Okay, we talked about this. We know the answer is true. And why is integrated surface monitoring used? Which it's used to demonstrate which of the following? So we know it doesn't have to be done simultaneously, but the other two answers are correct. Yeah, so A and C. Okay, so that wraps up this portion of just kind of the general overview of the regulation and record keeping and monitoring and so on.